Alrighty, let's get into building a custom website. The goal of this is to show some responsive tricks and tips that I've been reading about and learning, and it's also not going to implement Bootstrap that much because this site needs custom layouts which shouldn't break on different screen sizes, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So this is an example of what we're building. It's a website for Inyama, a restaurant in Windhoek, and if we have a look on the desktop version, it's pretty much standard. You can see some layouts. This kind of looks like 2 columns, this looks like 3 columns. This navbar is, the standard Bootstrap Navbar. This is a background. But if we have a look at the responsiveness, if this is on iPad, the menu bar kind of shrinks with the screen size, and this text in the middle here also scales up and down with the background. One thing maybe is that this fork with the meat on it kind of, as the screen shrinks, you can see over here as well, it kind of moves. But this didn't actually turn out too bad because we actually want a little bit of the gap there between the meat and the fork and the text, otherwise they overlap and it didn't really look that great. So this actually looked fine to me. But the interesting part is when we look at this layout over here, Bootstrap kind of won't respond with this to keep this layout. It will sort of, you always have a choice to like break it on screen sizes, or you have to like go set multiple screen size column sizes, and this probably would have had offset, and I just thought it was easier to implement this as a custom style. And if you look at the iPad, it maintains. If you look at the iPhone 5, it maintains. And this looks small on the computer screen because you actually have this large screen you're looking at. But if you open the site on your phone, you'll see this takes about 50% of your screen. So this text is actually not that small on a cell phone screen. And this is the 6 Plus. Same layout, so we try and keep this layout throughout all screen sizes. If we go down, this also maintains the layout as the screen gets smaller. We don't really want this to go below as Bootstrap usually does, or this to break. We really just want to keep it like that. This implements the columns, but this is actually not Bootstrap. This is the grid that we spoke about earlier. This is Bootstrap. This is a 2 6 columns. And so is this. This is 3 columns in Bootstrap. And if you look, the bigger the screen gets, here you can see some Bootstrap going on where it breaks the columns stack on top of each other. If you look here, they stack on top, but on the large screen size, they are actually next to each other. So yeah, that's what we're going to be building, and hopefully we can learn some stuff with EMs, view height, view width. So let's get right started. I'm gonna build this from scratch. I'll press my Windows key and X and pull up my command prompt from my other screen. I'll cd to desktop, and on the desktop I'll basically just create a folder called Nyama2 because I already have the original one. That file will be folder will be saved on my other screen, so I'll just quickly grab it from there if I can find it. I'll put it on this screen just so we can see what's going on. I'll cd into Nyama2, and in here I'll just open my code editor. Using Visual Studio Code, you can use any editor you want. To start off with, I'll just create the basic index.html. This is a static site, so we don't really use a lot of JavaScript. But if you did have a look at my previous video, I did show how to include the different HTML files from the views folder in a sort of componenting way, and I think I'll stick to that. So let's just create the boilerplate. We'll call it Inyama, and I'm breaking stuff. I broke stuff. Okay. Call it Inyama responsive tutorial. Cool. And for this we'll need Bootstrap, we'll need MDB, and we'll need jQuery. I'm just going to pull that from the other file that I have created. You can go have a look at the scripts if you want to, and the CSS that I do include here. First of all, I bring in Font Awesome for the icons, then Bootstrap Core CSS, then MDB, which is this. It's also a CSS framework that provides components. Then my custom styles, which I'll just create right now in the CSS folder. We'll create style.css. Cool. And then I'm bringing in the JavaScript, and I guess I'll put these in the footer. Maybe we can actually move these to a footer file, but before we do that, we kind of need to create the ability to make custom components. So the way we're going to do that is, if you go check my previous video, I did write the script, but I'm just going to pull it in this time. Maybe I'll go through it. So what the script is doing, it's creating a variable, and it's using the jQuery sort of syntax. And it's creating an attribute, or it's taking on the attributes called data include on the HTML elements, and then it's looping over those, and it's getting the files from the views folder and sort of loading it inside that HTML. So what we can do here is we can create a views folder, and in the views folder we create a footer just to sort of abstract this code and not have everything planted in. Let's actually move all of this. Cool. And for that to work, we need to sort of create a div with the attribute data include. And we only have to call it footer because we are dynamically appending HTML to the name, to the attribute. So we can save that, and the way we can check if this works, I'll right click and open with live server, and that should open the HTML file. We can't really see. Let's inspect this to see if any errors. We have one error, and we cannot find favicon.ico, so that is fine. We don't have a favicon, so we'll just leave that out for now. Next up, we want to test Bootstrap. I'm pretty sure it works because there was no errors, but let's just create a h1 and we'll say hello world. Awesome. So let's save that and see if it has some styles, and it does. Perfect. So that means Bootstrap is included. So let's create a file in the views folder which will bring in the navbar. We can remove this for now, so we don't need it. In views, we'll create a new file called nav.html. We'll go into the navbar, and for this I'm actually just going to use a Bootstrap Navbar, so I don't have to code it from scratch or use Flexbox or anything like that. I actually had a layout that looked something like this. So there was a logo on the side and a few buttons on the right. So if we look at MDB's documentation, this is sort of the exact one we need. I'm actually just going to use the nav code that I got here because I did put some custom stuff on there. I will go through what I did. So let's just grab that navbar from the actual file. This is almost the same as copying it from Bootstrap, but with some custom stuff. So what this is just a Bootstrap Nav with the recommended classes here, and it expands on large screen sizes, and it's dark, which means that the text will be light, I'm pretty sure. This margin bottom 1 is just creating a bit of space between the content and the navbar, and then I'm bringing in this image logo.png, but I don't have that. So in order to save time, I'm not going to create the folder here and add all the files one by one. I'm actually just going to drag over this image file. And when you look at these, it's just all the images that we used in the actual site. This I cropped out of Photoshop, if you can see that. This is the logo. This is the intro background. This image is too large to display, but I can show you on. Here we go. That's the intro image. Looks nice and clean. Section 2, I just used this entire image just to sort of save time adding elements one by one and keep them sort of together. Then section 3 was this, but I don't really need this because I'm not using it, so I'll delete that. And then this is that little fireplace image on the next section. So I guess if you do build a site that's similar, you can use your own images. Okay, so now that we've created this navbar, we sort of need to include it into our index.html. So what I'm going to do here is, why is the spacing off? I'm just going to create another div with the same attribute, and this should give me autocomplete, and I'll call this nav because that's exactly what we called it in the views folder. So your name always has to match, and hopefully this adds the navbar to the document. If we refresh, so if we refresh this, we see nothing is happening, and I have a feeling it's because of jQuery and that include file. So just to test that out, I'm actually just going to move jQuery alone to the index.html file on top right below styles, and I'll also take that custom script I wrote, which is here. Okay, so I'll take that custom script and we'll move that to the head file as well. So right below jQuery. I always seem to have problems with the way jQuery gets loaded, or anything that's dependent on it gets loaded, but I think this should work. Let's have a look. Yeah, there we go. So the navbar has loaded. If we inspect, we don't have any $sign is undefined or such stuff, but it seems like everything is now loading. If we look at the footer, we have the scripts and we have the navbar here. So that is cool. Next step, we should probably change the color of this navbar. So this is the point where I'll sort of start using the style.css file, and the actual site uses some custom fonts that are being like this font that I'll bring in via an import in the HTML. So what I'll do here is I'll just add the two imports, and the fonts that I'll be using are the Roboto and PT Serif, and Roboto I just imported the large font. Next up, I'll start writing the CSS, and I like adding comments to the CSS to make the sections clear, and usually I also structure the CSS to sort of flow in the same way as the document, where the navbar is on top, then the intro section, then the about section, etc. For the navbar, I'll just target the biggest parent of the entire component, and what I want to do with this is sort of override the background color. To do that, I'll just use a RGBA value that has an alpha. I'll make it black, but I'll give it an opacity of 0.5, and this should give us that black color. And actually, I'm pretty sure this won't work if we have a look. If we refresh, yeah, that's because Bootstrap has this class on the nav itself called info color, which is that blue color. I'll remove that, and just to make sure, I'll go and place an important on this CSS, and if we have a look now, we'll see the navbar that has the right color. So this is the point where I'll usually start testing already. For testing, I just open iPad Air with this Chrome extension called Mobile RWD Tester, and I like opening the iPad size because you can actually scale it, and it seems like it's nice and responsive. This is really small. I'm pretty sure that there aren't many devices that will have that screen size, probably about here, but it seems good. The navbar is responding, and that's thanks to Bootstrap's awesome classes. So next up, let's start with the intro section. Actually, before we start with the intro section, we should actually have a look at this navbar. There is a slight difference, like this button is red, there's a bit more spacing in between these buttons, and I think I want to implement that. So the way I'll do that is I'll go to the CSS and I'll keep this in the navbar section as it does seem appropriate. We also kind of, when we look at the navbar here, it's kind of fixed to the top of the screen. It doesn't stay absolutely at the top of the document, so we kind of want to fix this to the top as well. This doesn't have a scroll, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't automatically stay fixed to the top. And to do that, I'll use some custom CSS. I'm not sure if Bootstrap has classes that will do this for you, but I don't mind writing the custom CSS. So I'll just set a fixed position on the navbar, and whilst doing that, I'll make sure that the navbar is in the exact position that I want it to be. By doing this, that should allow you to position it right at the top of the window. And this is breaking. If we refresh, that looks good. It seems like now it is at the top of the screen, still fixed. Next up, I'll just add some custom classes that I've been playing with. I'll start with the nav items, and these are the allies within the nav. I'll add a margin to them to give them that little spacing. 0 top and bottom, and about 10 pixels left and right was the amount that I decided is nice. And then I also want to play with the font because I want it to be just a little bit bolder. Then the next item I'll target is the special nav. So if you look at the navbar, I have created a custom class, I'm pretty sure, on this thing where I called it special nav, and that's because I want to change this booking button's color and shape, etc. So I'll target special nav, and I'll give special nav a background of a reddish color. So what I like doing is just setting it to the ugliest red possible, but then sort of just hovering over this and then finding a better red, if you can put it that way. So I don't want that extremely dark red. I'd like this more faded type red, and I'm guessing right about there is a good amount. So let's save that and see what it looks like. That's the original, and yeah, that looks fine. Now these nav items need to actually space out, so they need to have this margin, and for that to happen, we did set a margin on the nav items, but it seems that it did not affect it. It did not affect it because I called it nav items, and this has a class of nav item. So that's a rookie error, but typos happen and we're all human. And if we look at it now, we have a nice sort of margin on them. And this is the point where I would test again, because changing margins and padding usually plays with responsiveness, but because this navbar is so wide, I don't think we'll have any issues with that. Another thing we want to check is if we open it. Okay, that looks okay. This button, maybe I don't want it to be that red, so what I'll do is I'll actually open my CSS. Or I do want it red, but I don't want it that wide. So what I'll try and do here is I'll target the navbar nav, and if we have a look at what that is, in the navbar you'll see navbar nav is this entire unordered list, and what I want to do with that is just center these items, and I don't think it will affect the actual non-collapsed nav. It will just affect the collapsed nav, so we can test that. Let's just go save this file. We'll first have to say align items center. If we have a look at that, maybe just refresh for safe measure and open this again, and there we go. It doesn't have that super long red button here anymore. It's nice and centered and it looks good, and it does respond well. It did not break the large size, and everything still looks good. I might want to add a little bit of border radius on this button. It looks too square and ugly, so let's go to the CSS and we'll just target the special nav. What we'll add to it is a border radius, yep, a border radius of about, let's say, 2 pixels. Just keep it really small, so it's not really noticeable, but it does make a little bit of a difference. If you go to that, have a look at that, you'll see it's not as pointy and sharp anymore. But I don't want it round either, so that looks good. Next up, we maybe want to change the sizing of this button just to make it look a bit more special. And usually with buttons, sizing to me is better to do with padding inside the button. Let's just grab the CSS and we'll set padding. And I think we sort of only need padding on the left and right, so let's do 0 and 10 pixels padding. This should lengthen it out a little bit. Let's have a look at that. Yeah, that looks better in my opinion. So next up, we want to work on this entire intro section here. The intro section is just this meaty image, and this is already section 2 that's just overlapping the intro image. To get started, I'll just start with the HTML. We'll need to create the file in the views folder so that it can get included, and then we'll just bring it into the HTML here. We'll use our neat little attribute and we'll give it the same name. And in this intro.html file, we just want to create that component, and it's basically, if we have a look at it, it's just a section with a background and some text on it. So it shouldn't be too heavy to write the HTML for this. We'll give it the parent component and we'll call it Hero Intro. And in the Hero Intro, that will be the background. So in there, we kind of want text, and I think we'll box this text up. We'll call it text holder, and the text had a H1 and an H2. If you remember, we'll have a look here. There's the big H1, which obviously needs custom styles because that is huge text, and this H2. And this is two funny lines coming from somewhere. There's no other HTML element called span or line or HR or anything. So this is an interesting thing to code, and I think I'll show you how to do that. So we'll start with the H1 and we'll just give it the name, and we'll do the H2 and we'll do that little slogan, and that is all for our intro HTML. So I'm guessing that will just look ugly at the moment. Yeah, it's all in the corner and no background. So let's get started with the background. So for the intro section, we'll go to our CSS and we'll do our little comment here, and I'll call it Hero Intro section, intro Hero section, whatever. And we should target the Hero Intro class. That's what we'll use for our background. And on this Hero Intro, we need this big image, and if you look at the image file here, I have included that as this name. This, you should just trust me that that's the actual image. So let's get started. This will have a few classes because we want to have everything in here sort of stay absolute on the screen. We want the background to be full size. We want to create a height on it. We want to position the background. We want to position the text on the background. So let's just get started with adding a position absolute to this. And one thing you need to remember about positioning something absolutely on a document is that it removes itself from being visible to other elements. So if I add this, let me just add the background quick to display that to you. I'll call this background image, and that background image will have a URL of image, and it's this one. So this will probably look ugly, it'll probably repeat, it'll probably be left aligned, and this absolute will just push it to, I'm guessing, the top of the document. So let's have a look. There it is. Pretty ugly. It's basically just containing all the text that we wrote, so the rest of the image isn't being shown, and as you can see, it's sort of overlapping the navbar. If we inspect this navbar, it will always have a height of let's have a look at the height, 66 pixels. It seems like if we check at the top of the where that little tooltip is popping up, it has a height of 66 pixels, and I'm pretty sure it stays like that throughout all screen sizes. So what we want to do is really we want to move that background, the Euro intro, down 66 pixels, and we also kind of want it to be just a little bit smaller than the screen size, so that the next content displays before scrolling. So we don't want to just have that background, we sort of want to introduce the next section here. So to make all that happen, we'll start off with the position of the background, and for that we'll use a top of 66 pixels, because that's how large the background image is, and we'll do a left of 0, and we'll do a right of 0, and then we'll set a height, and this height will be relative to the screen size, so we'll use 90 view height and not percent, because percent uses the parent's size and goes basis on a percentage of that, and because this is positioned absolute, I'm pretty sure that won't really affect the element. Next we actually want to set some background properties, and just to keep this sort of in order, I'll set the background properties right below the background image. So the properties we want to set is background repeat. Yep, and then we want to set that to no repeat, because we just want the one image. And then we'll set the size of the background, and this is okay to set as cover, but you'll see later that cover isn't always the best option for background images, and sometimes you need to sort of set different background sizes. And the last thing we want to do is position the background, and I have played with this, because let me show you what happens when we center it. Let's first have a look if this actually worked. So let's refresh this, and it's not working. So I debugged this a little bit, and I found an error in my code. If we look at the code here, I wrote background, and then I set background to this weird property which probably doesn't even exist. So this should be background position, and this should work. Let's have a look. There we go. So this is exactly 66 pixels from the top, and actually we don't really want that, because we want this navbar to be over the image. So maybe we should set the top to 0, and if we do that, we can just set this entire thing to 0. It should be there. It is now at the top of the screen, but now we have a problem where the navbar is below the background image, and we don't really want that. So we'll use a z index on the navbar, and we'll set it to 1, and we'll set the Euro intro z index to -1, and this should give us a navbar on top. There we go. So we have our little navbar. Next up, we really want to play with this text that's also not in the right position, and also not the right color and size. So we'll start off by targeting text holder, and that is the containing element on the HTML. And for the text holder, we kind of want to get it away from the top and set it to the middle. I guess you should play with this value. I found it to be quite centered if we do 35 view height, because I did play with it a little bit, and there you can see it's not really the right color, so let's just make it, for now let's just set it like this. And I don't know if this will work, if it needs an important, but yeah, there we go. So to me that looks about in the middle of the document, and we sort of want to align it to the center as well. And to do that, I think the best way is actually not to use margins, but to go on the parent container and just say text align center. So there won't be any other elements except this text holder on there, so that's fine if we use text align center, but sometimes there will be other elements and you don't really always want to use text align, and you only want to position this as a single element, and then you'll have to play around with itself. So there we go, we're right in the center. If we inspect this on the responsiveness, we can see that remains quite centered. So yeah, that looks good. For the next thing, we kind of want to change the size. We want to add a background, not a background, a drop shadow. We want to smallen this and add those two, and also make it a bit darker. So the way we'll do that is we'll actually just target the elements inside. We'll have to say text holder because we don't want to just target H1. We want to target only the H1 inside the text holder, and for that we'll use a font weight to make it a bit bolder. 600 is fine. And for the font family, actually we'll set the entire font family on the text holders just so that it's all in one place, and we'll set that to Roboto. And I'm sure the custom, let's have a look at that. Yeah, so that makes that a little bit bolder, and the font family, I'm not sure if Bootstrap does actually use Roboto as its custom font family, but just in case, we've set it to Roboto anyway. Now it sets it to the Mac system font. Roboto is in there somewhere, so probably does use Roboto, but that's fine. We'll just set it to Roboto because we did import it at the top here. And I'm thinking that if we go have a look at the index.html, we are using Bootstrap, which probably does include Roboto somewhere. But anyway, back to the text. So in the text, we'll stay in the styles file. So that's another thing about these components. They look pretty small in the HTML, and they're very separable because we only have one thing to care about in this file. We only have one thing to care about in this file, and that gives us the ability to separate our concerns and actually just make these sections based on those sections and let them run sequentially, which makes sense. And we'll spend a lot more time in the CSS than the HTML. So we want to target the H1 here. We've set the font weight because we want it to be a bit bigger. So for the font size, if we have a look at the current font size, it's pretty static. Doesn't change. It doesn't change with the screen size. It stays that size. And once we get to this size, we don't really want that. We want it to scale down because this is going to be bigger than the cell phone screen size. So we have to use a size that's relative to the width of the screen, because that's what changes on devices. And in order to use that, I'm just gonna go font size, and I'll set that to, I've played with this a bit, but you can set it to whatever you want, but I'm gonna set it to 10 view width, and that should be pretty big. If we go have a look at it, yeah, there we go, it's huge. But if we inspect it with the neat little tool, it actually scales now. The bottom one doesn't because we haven't set the font size, but this scales with your device, and that's a neat little thing to have, because text scalability makes a big difference in responsive design. So next up, we sort of want to add that drop shadow. And I think it's called box shadow, not drop shadow. I'm used to Photoshop stuff here. But for the box shadow, I also played with this value. I think this is the X value and this is the Y value. And then it's sort of the spread, and I found that to be 6 pixels, and then the color. And the color, I'll use another alpha value, and that seems good. It's about the same color as the navbar. So let's go have a look. And this is creating a large box around that holder of the Inyama. So the large box around this is the entire element. We don't really want to set box shadow because that's setting the shadow on the box. We want to set a different CSS property called text shadow, and this should make a shadow on the text itself, and that looks good. That looks pretty similar to this. I think I'll leave that for now. Oh, there we go. So it was still loading a bit and it's a bit thinner. Looks nice. So next up, we want to target this, and this requires quite a bit more CSS because we have those lines on the side, we have them grayed out, we have to set the size. So I'll just go through this CSS and we'll target that by targeting the H2. And we'll start off with the color. For the color, we want it just to be a little bit more transparent. So we'll set another RGBA value, but this time we'll max it out to white. And for the opacity, we'll set it to 0.7. So we don't want it to be too see-through, but we kind of want that transparency to give it a bit of a, you know, different look to the H1. So it's sort of that, like, this is what's next. Next up, we want to play with the font size and the overflow and the text align, because this element is part of something which I'll create with befores and afters in CSS, and those are required on the parent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, on the H2, just do a hidden overflow, and you'll see why I'm doing this in a minute, and I'll text align center. I'm pretty sure it's already inheriting text align center from this, from here, but let's just keep it specific, and then we will start adding those befores and afters. So what we need to do is we need to target the H2 in the text holder, and we have to give it the pseudo class called before, and we'll actually just do the same thing for the after because they both have the same thing. And what we want to do here is we want to give it a background color, because this is like a line with a background color, and we want to give it the same background color as the font itself so that it stays consistent. And next up, we want to give it content, and what before and after does it adds a pseudo class to the element. So if we give it content like hello, it will add this to the HTML. And if we inspect this, we can see that there's no real element added to the H2, but there's these pseudo classes which are different than actual HTML elements, and they can really help with stuff like making these lines, etc. So we actually want this content to be empty because we don't really want to say anything there, but we need to give it a height because the lines need to be seen. So I'll just give it a height of 2 pixels, and I'll position it, I guess we can position it relative. And I'm thinking that this still won't display because even though we set a width and a height, it won't display because we haven't given it a display property. And I'll set this up here. The way I want to display it is inline and block, and we're kind of setting it to this massive width to see what it's relative to. And if we have a look, we'll see it's actually 100% of the view width. So the parent, which is the body, probably is what is, or even this intro section is what it's relative to. And we'll use that to our benefit to set dynamic widths. And I'm thinking a good width to go by is 5% of that. And because it's inline block, it should be next to the text. Let's have a look. There we go. But now it's also set to the bottom of the text, which we don't want. It doesn't look nice. So there's a cool property we can use called vertical align, and we'll set that to center. And so on this vertical align property, we don't really want to use center, we want to use middle. And there we go, it's set to the middle, and we don't really want it that close to the text. And to able to target that, we can't do that here because this one is on the left, the before, and this one's on the right, the after. So if we just set a margin on either side, it won't really work. So we have to target them. Let's see if I can. Yeah, we have to target them separately. So we're going to target the H2 after, and that will be on the right side of the text. And what we want to do with that is set a left property. And we can do this because we set position relative, so we can set a left property. This needs to be responsive as well, so we'll set it as EM, and we'll let's check what that does. Alright, it's giving us a nice little gap there. And for the I'll just copy and paste this, and I guess we have to set this before and then after just to have it make sense. I'll set the before to have a right value of the same amount so that they are evenly spaced. Let's have a look at that, and that looks much better. So if we check the responsiveness on the iPad, the lines pretty much stay where they need to stay, and we still have the problem where now the lines are nice and responsive, but the actual text is not changing, and that looks a bit weird. So let's target the H2, and we'll have to give it a font size, and I'm thinking it has to be smaller than the H1, which is 10, and it has to be quite a bit smaller, so I'll divide that by 5 and I'll give it a 2B width and see what that looks like. Here we don't really see a big difference, but if we look at the, there we go, so that seems like it's nice and responsive, and it's staying smaller compared to the H1. So thank you guys, that was part 1 of the custom website. I think I'll end it there before we reach that unwatchable length again. Please let me know what you thought, if like there's anything that you guys like enjoyed about this, and if there's anything I should improve or change when doing these kinds of videos. And also next time we'll be diving into quite a bit of responsive stress, where we'll do this section that has to respond to the size of the screen. So this I'll call the about section, or our story section, or whatever, but it has quite a few properties set on it to be able to have these items stay in the exact position that we need them, and this text needs to respond, and it has to happen fluently, where everything responds at the same time. Because if you look at this box, it's responding, the text inside the box is responding, that text needs to stay still. This is a static image, so this box needs to stay relative to that static image. quite a few things, and it does use media queries, it does use EMs and view widths and view heights. So that's something fun to look forward to for the next video. But I hope there was something useful about this intro section that we did today, and I can't wait to do the next section. Thanks for watching, and yeah, cheers.